Hello. You come on over and be quiet.
Oh, I'm sorry, you're interviewing.
Come on.
Oh, I get it now. I get it. Okay, you guys go ahead.
Oh, shoot, he's interviewing.
I want people to have an adventure in life. My life has been full of adventures. And I think that this is one chance for them to have that adventure. And it's life-changing. It gives you a sense of not going to work on a train every day. It's something a little bit dangerous, and I think that breaking the rules is something that traditions are broken in things like this. To live a traditional life is very dull. Come on, fun. You know, since I designed the Meyers Manx 50 years ago or more, I've probably had that many men walk up to me to shake my hand. Dozens and dozens of men, fathers. They said, please, I want to shake your hand. What did I do? You provided something that saved my son from drugs. What? I guess it gives people a chance to have an adventure. I think that's really what it's all about. If you don't have an adventure in life, don't go to your grave without an adventure of some kind. And this is that possibility. It's a way of dreaming into the realities. Dreaming is where something starts, your hands make it become real, and then you go do it. And if you fail, so what? The whole thing was a piece of life that had some color, some excitement, some danger, all of which gives you a sense of pride. I think it helps people to come away from the drab life they might be leading. I think off-road racing is a wonderful outlet for people that have never done such crazy things. Okay, I feel that the race to me has become quite a surprise in that it's lasted so long, but you start to wonder why it's so popular, and you go back to the kind of lifestyle that I led when I came into the thing was pretty loose. It wasn't about higher learning or education, it was just about having fun. And I think that racing in the desert anywhere is a lot of fun. The cars that do it are made special to become successful, hoping to win. But the better part is that it opens the door to the young mind, that's a young boy, that dreams of being something like a famous race driver. Well, being a famous race driver means you better have a lot of money to go to Indianapolis or Formula One and such things, but not in off-road racing. You can start with the Volkswagen Beetle, of all things. The last thing in the world that would be considered any kind of a race car, but yet there's a class for them. And it's just full of young people wanting to be race drivers. They hope they can lead themselves to their victories that will lead them to better cars and faster cars and all that will be the thing that they want. Well, at the very beginning, there was a party up in snowy country in Big Bear, out of Los Angeles, and there was the motorcycle guys over in one cabin, the buggy guys were in another cabin where I was, but the guy that owned the cabin was Joe Parkhurst, the other guys with the motorcycles. Joe Parkhurst phoned over and said, why don't you bring your guys over and let's have some drinks. So the buggy guys went over to the cabin with the motorcycle guys, and we had a lot of fun that day, kidding each other. Oh, well, a buggy ought to beat a bike any day, and a bike ought to beat a buggy. And of course, I really didn't know that these world-famous bike riders like the Eakins brothers, Mulder and so forth, they were such talented guys, had run and won many, many bike races across deserts. So I really couldn't see how a car could beat that. But nevertheless, among my friends at that party was Ted Mangels, who we miss very much because he was a genius and he always had a way of opening the door to some idea that could be possibly something that would be a lot of fun. And he said, the following day he came to my office and said, I think we could beat those bikes. I said, no, I don't think so. Well, I'll show you how. Well, we had been in Baja a lot. For a period of about 3 years. We've been there maybe 75 times, I guess. examining Baja for the history. I wasn't all about off-road racing at all. I loved going to old mines and churches and all that and digging around in all this rubble, 150, 200 years old. And out of which that experience told Ted that we could probably beat bikes because, first of all, a dune buggy carries 2 people. It'll carry also a lot of gasoline. So we took the car, my old very first Manx and old red, and I put some oxygen bottles. I think on Monday he was telling me how we can actually beat the motorcycles conceivably, feasibly. On Tuesday, I'm standing in my shop staring at some oxygen bottles, and I measure their capacity of 8 gallons. 3 of them on the car would be 25 gallons or something. 15 gallons of the tank gave us 40 gallons of gas. Around our legs, between our knees, were jugs. Behind the seats and everywhere else we could find a place. We managed to get 65 gallons of gas on the car. Now, why 65 gallons? Well, it's 1,000 miles. How do you know what kind of mileage we're going to get? We're never going to be in low. We'll never be in fourth. We'll be in second and third all the time. What kind of mileage are you going to figure out of that? So we guessed at 15 miles a gallon. All right, we need 65 gallons to get the 1,000 miles. That's the way it all came about. He talked me into it on Tuesday. On Thursday, we went and did it. That was our prep. I don't even think I did anything but just climb around to the car and make sure all the bolts were tight.
Yeah.
All right, the motorcycle guys, and you know, it was during the time of ET records, elapsed time records. There was no wheel-to-wheel race. There was just a couple of guys over there that's going to take on those 2 guys over here, and they're going to beat them. And they use their motorcycles, and these are very famous, excellent bike riders. That's the reason I didn't think we could beat them, but they had set a record over a period of 4 years. They had only lowered their first attempt by 8 minutes. So that made it seem even more impossible for the world's famous bike riders to only lower their own record by an 8 minute, which means that we'd have less chance than ever to beat that. So, however, Ted was right. We went down there anyway on a feasibility run from top to bottom, north to south. Then we had to get the Mexicans to give us some kind of a pat on the back and say, yes, we'll make it legal. The feasibility run that Ted had planned would be to go from Tijuana to La Paz. And if we could do it in something like what we thought was around 30 hours, we could have beat the bikes by 10 hours to lower the record by that much. So we did. And we had a feasibility run with a couple of other cars chasing us. We camped at night, just kept our driving times during the day, and I did all the driving going south. And we got to La Paz in close to 30 hours. So we had feasibly beaten the bikes by 10 hours. So it looked doable. So we gathered in my hotel room and they said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, let's do it. So we turned around and we went, then we had to go to the police chief and the Navy and the Army and finally the tourism department, where they said they'd send a radio message from La Paz to Tijuana to have a record set in some legal way with a big piece of paper. And so that's what we did. And the trips north, we broke lots of things. The brakes went away because we tore off a brake line, and the transmission nose fell loose, and we had to wire all that shut. But we managed to get into Tijuana still in about 32 or 3 hours. However, the Mexican police station, the cop, the police sergeant sat there, the desk sergeant, I guess you call him. He sat there and just said, no comprende. He didn't know anything about it. So we were stuck. So we then found ourselves over at the tourism department, which opens at 8. Now it's 9 o'clock and we're there. And it wasn't open. We had to wait until 10. 2 hours he's late. After the cop couldn't understand anything and we couldn't understand him. Very little Spanish. Anyway, we finally got it written on a piece of paper that we did it in 34 hours and 45 minutes or something. And it was, I think we beat the bikes by over 5 hours. That's the way it started. Now, that piece of paper that they gave us showed that we had set a record in Baja, and it means nothing. All you can do is take it to a magazine editor and they'll write a story about it. That's not a whole great big way of expanding the idea. my wife Shirley worked at Road and Track magazine, and those people, John and Elaine Baum, were very, very sweet, very, very considerate people, and they said, this is something that we should let the world know about. And they set out a press kit that said, Buggy beats bikes in Baja around the world, to all motoring companies, every construction of every kind of vehicle, every editor of every car magazine, every guy that writes about it. There was like 120 different names, and that thing set the world on fire, and it suggested an adventure. And that was the reason for the very first race of, I believe, 68 cars that gathered, most of which were Volkswagens, most of which, those Volkswagens were dune buggies called Meyers Manxes. And Meyers Manx won that first race. There was, I believe, of all the records you can tabulate, you will find there was 8 records, 5 of which were set by Meyers Manxes. So we had a great success in the beginning of off-road racing. The question was, how did this newsletter, or pardon me, this piece of paper that said that Meyers and Mangels set this record beating the bikes. It went out to the world of automotive journalists and so forth. But a guy phoned up, his name was Ed Perlman, and said, you know, Bruce, we should put this together and make some sort of an organization. Well, I'm busy building dune buggies. I had a company that was very, very active, and we were so busy that all I could say to him was, it was a lot of fun, and if you want to do something like that, I'll be glad to help you. He said, you know of a good restaurant? I said, I do. I have a dear friend that has a string of them. And I phoned him, and he said, take the one over on 4th Street in Santa Ana. And that's where 22 people met. I brought 11, and Ed Perlman brought 11. And I was awarded the very first trophy in off-road racing. It's a little wooden plaque with a flying wheel with wings on it. And it said world record, 34 hours and 45 minutes or something. And that's the way it started. Now, Ed Perlman was a guy with I think a Barnum and Bailey kind of mind. He had a good sense of how to make things look good and make it attractive. And so he went to work on that, and it culminated in about 6 weeks, I think. There was the very first race that started at the Bull Ring in Tijuana, and it was to go all the way to La Paz. But you don't race from Tijuana, because Tijuana is just a lot of streets and not a good place to go fast. So he had a rally down to Ensenada, which is 60 miles south, and we all had to be there at a certain moment. And then the race really started the next morning in Ensenada. That was the beginning of NORA, National Off-Road Racing Association. The very first race was won by a Meyers Manx, one of my dune buggies. There was a motorcycle that followed it, and another Meyers Manx followed that. So I'm a little proud of that. That we won the very first race and came in second. And in the ET records, there's 2 Meyers Manxes. The very first ET record was John Crean with a Meyers Manx. I set the record that beat the motorcycles in another Meyers Manx. The first race had 2 more Meyers Manxes, first and second. So that's the way it all started. After which, the second race, I went in and my car broke. The third race, I did a very strange thing. I passed Parnelli Jones. You don't want to ever do that, folks. That's going to lead to something that, like broken legs. About 100 yards later, I'm laying there in the dirt with broken legs. That's another whole story. So that was the end of my racing. I only raced 3 times. I set the first record. My cars won the first race, and the second race we broke, and I broke my legs and all these things. But so that's the way it all started.
So about that.
The interest, of course, for watching the whole thing go on and become so huge and world famous was kind of dazzling. And for my mind, I never thought it could ever get so big. But I went back to racing once again with a nice bunch of guys. There was too many chiefs and not enough Indians, I think, something like that. The car was given, not knowing what to do with it. Bruce, you're going to have to start last. So we started the race last, and there's 300 cars in this thing, and motorcycles. And so we started the 300th car. Now, what you got in front of you is a bunch of Mexicans that are up on the hillsides watching the race, having fun with their family, and then they all pile in their pickup truck and come back home. So I had to race against, here comes another pickup truck full of Mexicans. That's not a way to win a race. You're never going to do much of anything. And the car broke anyway, saving my ass. Pardon me about that. You can edit that out. But that was my last experience in racing in Baja.
But so
You know, to set a record, to start the whole thing is one thing. To finish a race a bunch with a lot of other cars is not the same thing. And finishing a race after that, most people just go to race in Baja and hoping they'll come in first, second, or third, or to even finish. There's so many hundreds of cars and bikes. This time, we went down there on a movie-making proposition to recreate the history, and I was handed a car. I was only 5 miles from the finish line, and here comes the car. It now only runs on 3 cylinders. It only works in 3rd gear, and they're telling me to, as I put my helmet on and climbed in the car, don't kill the engine. That's not fun when the car only has 3rd gear and 3 cylinders. But I went leaping off, and we went to the other end, and we crossed the line and went into the very finish line. And my wife comes up with her group of the club people from the Manx Club, and they have already had pictures taken of their cars crossing the line. And she hands me a picture, and it says, "I beat you. Thanks a lot, wife. Here I've done." Oh, well. Again, so much fun. When people come to this thing to do this, and especially people that are not from Southern California, Southern California are used to seeing dune buggies on trailers and going here and being built and so forth. But somewhere back in the other end of our country, the people come out here and they've heard about it, they've read about it, and they get to go and do it, and that just changes their life. They're babbling idiots. They all go home, tell all their friends what a great life experience that is. It's not about winning the race, it's just the whole business of getting the car ready and getting involved with all these hundreds of people and all these crazy Mexican situations out in the desert and funny little villages, and the wind blowing or the water being dirty or all sorts of stuff that they don't sound attractive, but once you've done it, you just can't stop doing it. It's like taking some sort of acid or something, and it changes your life. So off-road racing has become a world famous thing to do. We've had people come from Japan with a motorcycle taken all apart in bags, and then they rent a motorhome in Los Angeles, put the bike all back together, and the 2 wives drive the motorhome down the length of Baja while the boys go play with their motorcycle and race. And they're so happy they raced in the Baja races. And then they go back to Japan and take the motorhome, take the bike back and put it all in bags. Can you imagine? Crossing the Pacific Ocean, that's the world's largest ocean, with a bunch of bags with a motorcycle in them, and then racing and saying, I did it. See, I guess there's some kind of heroic thing about doing it. It does change your life. It changed their life. They keep coming back. I want people to have an adventure in life. My life has been full of adventures. And I think that this is one chance for them to have that adventure. And it's life-changing. It gives you a sense of not going to work on a train every day. It's something a little bit dangerous, and I think that breaking the rules is something that traditions are broken in things like this. To live a traditional life is very dull. Come on, fun. I guess it gives people a chance to have an adventure. I think that's really what it's all about. If you don't have an adventure in life, don't go to your grave without an adventure of some kind. And this is that possibility. It's a way of dreaming into the realities. Dreaming is where something starts, your hands make it become real, and then you go do it. And if you fail, so what? The whole thing was a piece of life that had some color, some excitement, some danger, all of which gives you a sense of pride. I think it helps people to come away from the drab life they might be leading. I think off-road racing is a wonderful outlet for people that have never done such crazy things. You know, since I designed the Meyers Manx 50 years ago or more, I've probably had that many men walk up to me to shake my hand. Dozens and dozens of men, fathers. They said, please, I want to shake your hand. What did I do? You provided something that saved my son from drugs. What? Yeah, I could smell the grass being smoked in his bedroom, but he walks out and says, Dad, look at the bitchin' dune buggy in the magazine. Dad saw what he had to do. He went and bought a kit, went down and bought all the bits for the Volkswagen, and they started bonding. The bonding never stopped. The family got into it. The kids, everybody. Dad's long gone. The kid is now 55 or 60 years old, and he's standing there saying, that's the buggy. I'll never sell it. What a love affair. What a cohesion of family values. What a glue to bring people together. To enhance love and excitement. You've helped your child stay out of trouble, and the dune buggy was the reason. Or the racing car. The off-road racer he wraps his life in these things. I wonder what he would have done without off-road racing. It offered something that enables us to experience something more than the drab life that we might have otherwise led. And it especially with young boys. I want to say that Ed Perlman, at the beginning of the very first race, came to you, he says, Bruce, he says, you're closer to Volkswagen than anybody because of what you do. You make dune buggies out of Volkswagens. He says, why don't you go and see if you can hit them up for some contingency money, for race money, pot money. So we wrote a cunning letter, myself, my wife, and my sales manager, and it very pleasingly showed that the race is about to happen. Of the 68 cars, I think there's 50 of them that are Volkswagen based. So Volkswagen gets a lift out of this whole thing. And we had written this letter with great hope, pointing out that it's good for them, Volkswagen. Now, the letter went to Eaglewood Cliffs, New Jersey, and we got a response that was amazing. It said, if you in any way align us with a racing image, we will sue you. That was 1967. 40 years later, there's a celebration in Long Beach, and Sal Fish, who now runs the whole thing, is given $100,000 from Volkswagen for racing money, a pair of both a gasoline and a diesel Touaregs, and they took his old thing, which he loved, and restored it for him and handed it all to him. It was the gift of Volkswagen, after 40 years, reversing their thinking, apparently. Well, of course, I don't blame them too much. They're back in somewhere on the East Coast where you're not aware of these things out in Southern California. And they finally awoke to it, obviously. So there was a complete turnaround in their attitude towards this racing image. Today, why not? Baja Bugs are the easiest things to get into a racing with. Is a little Volkswagen, air-cooled Volkswagen. You mess around with it. They have a class 11. It's the largest class of all, and it's full of young boys. So what have we got? A love affair that's going on with these Volkswagens. Well, and I'm glad they did. What I did was pretty innocent. I was just a character that lived a lifestyle of breaking traditions, and I guess the dune buggy did that. Starting a race with them that became world famous was an amazing thing for all of us. Myself, I can't even believe that I got so carried away I had to pass Parnelli Jones and break my legs. But that's youth, and that's the spirit of youth. We don't ever want to lose it. I hope it'll do Volkswagen some good.